Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Secretary General Gutierrez. We are here today presenting before the United Nations because wealth and income inequality are on the rise. I am Sarah, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Tiago, Luis, and Alex. We are from PBS Consulting, and we are here to discuss the risks posed by rising inequality and to present recommendations to improve the situation. This will be our agenda for today. Before we bring you through our recommendations, let us guide you through our view of the current situation. Here you can see a great disparity in the share of wealth held by different percentages of the population. In the pie chart on the left, which shows global wealth distribution, you can see that the top 1.1% is accumulating almost half of the total wealth in the world. And in the graph on the right, you can see that 12.2% of the population holds the vast majority of wealth. The middle class is shrinking, and the bottom 55% holds very little of the wealth. So what factors are contributing to growing wealth inequality, and what are their impact? When we look at businesses, we see a situation of increasing corporate profits, wages that are not pacing with inflation, and globalization with a shift of jobs and corporate entities to areas of lower wages and lower taxation. With individuals, we're seeing high inflation that's increasing the prices of consumer goods across the board. The cost of education is rising. Home prices are increasing rapidly, and rent prices are rising dramatically. These issues have a very destabilizing effect on society. So what is the current situation in wealthier nations? Politically, there's growing political polarization, which poses a threat to global security. Economically, future expenses are much more burdensome on the next generation, meaning empowering people to have access to a healthy lifestyle compared to paying for medical bills related to heart disease or diabetes in the future. Socially, lower rates of homeownership are associated with higher crime rates and decreased civic involvement. And all of this leads to greater disruption and unrest. Technologically, artificial intelligence and the rise of automation are changing the jobs landscape. And so now what are we seeing in developing nations? Politically, countries associated with higher levels of corruption, weak institutional power. Economically, too much dependence on aid from foreign nations, underdeveloped economies. Socially, extreme poverty, very low education levels, poor health conditions, and low access to fresh water. Technologically, poorly developed industries, energy is not available to most of the population, and inefficient or dirty energy is still being generated. So what measures could be adopted to stop the trend of increasing global wealth inequality within the next decade? To answer this, we will look at two things. The first being too much wealth is being accumulated in the top 1% of the world population, and additionally, too little wealth is available for the bottom 55% of the world population. To further discuss this and who might be able to have an impact on this, my colleague Tiago will further discuss.
Thank you, Sarah. Before we tackle the key issues that Sarah just exposed, we need to define the key player in this situation. So, who can drive this change? Here we have three alternatives: individuals, corporations, and governments. We score them according to this criteria of incentive, ability to organize, their ability to enforce, and available funds for each one of them. Here you can see our scores, and as you can see, we believe that governments are the key players in driving the change in wealth disparity. We also believe that individuals and corporations should also participate in these initiatives, but more often than not, they will lack the initiative to do so. So this is another reason why we believe that governments are the key, as they will be the ones that can create those same incentives. Regarding on what could be done to target the top 1%, we scored these four alternatives increasing financial transparency, setting wealth taxes, regulating corporate ownership of residential property, and setting global tax on inheritance. And we score them according to these four criteria of feasibility, their potential to reduce inequality, their public acceptance, and the need for international cooperation. Here are the scores that we gave to each one of them. And we believe that increasing the financial transparency will be a key measure to take in order to target the top 1% of the wealthiest individuals. Alex will further develop this, but before we go to Alex, I'll pass on to Luis so that he can continue with our analysis.
Thank you, Tiago. Now I will guide you through the possibilities to target what can be done about the bottom 55%. In order to target this population, we arranged the set of alternatives, which are to build essential infrastructure, set up the basic healthcare, help developing countries' institutions, and incentivize education and job training. We will rank them according the following criteria of feasibility, potential to reduce inequality, public support, and investment needed. But, well, is it really possible to make this ranking? So, how can in 2021 be that so many nations do not have the basics to live? It is something that's really an issue worldwide, and we should definitely be worried with it, and we should act as soon as possible. And so we believe that the solution for this key issue should be to tackle extreme poverty from every possible angle. In order to do it, we think that the UN should reinforce their current plan to eradicate extreme poverty until 2030. And to further develop on both these solutions, I will now pass the word to my colleague Alex. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luis. So taking a look at our very first key issue, which is that the 1% have much more disproportional wealth than the rest of the population in the world, what can be done to address this issue? Well, we decided that increasing financial transparency is the way to go. This could be done in several different ways. One is implementing a know your client style type of disclosure that will apply to individual tax return from individuals in all 136 countries set to implement the minimum corporate tax rate. How this would be done is by adding in another condition to the minimum corporate tax rate agreement that increases reporting requirements annually for individuals to their own local tax authorities. The reason why this would be implemented is that wealth disparity is being driven through unethical means around the world, and greater reporting requirements for wealthy individuals can put a stop to these practices. The overall impact would be that an annual KYC style tax disclosure for all individuals will include adequate justification for wealth accumulation in order to combat corruption, money laundering, and illegal exploitation of workers, which all lead to disproportional wealth accumulation. The second item that can be tackled under increasing financial transparency is eliminating tax havens. How can this be done? Well, nations can align and agree that ending tax havens is a way to move forward, and there should be a sanction package prepared to nations that do not comply with this agreement. Why this would help? Well, tax havens help the wealthier people to avoid paying their fair share. And this is one of the main drivers that increase wealth inequality between the top 1% of the global population and the rest of the global population. Overall, the impact would be an increase in global wealth transparency, which is positive for the key issues that we're trying to address. When taking a look at the second key issue of addressing income inequality for the bottom 55% of our world population, we decided to go with tackling extreme poverty. So what does this entail? This would mean collaborating with the wealthiest nations at the UN to raise awareness for the UN's already existing sustainable development goals, which already focus on tackling extreme poverty. How this would be accomplished is by launching a specific campaign targeting the points related to extreme poverty. So we would launch a campaign that would focus on the specific goals, such as Goal 1, eliminating poverty by 2030, and Goal 6, clean water and sanitation. Why this would be done? This would be done to bring dignity and meet the basic needs of the people that are most vulnerable in the world. And finally, the impact of this recommendation would be to reinforce the war against extreme poverty. So, to summarize everything up, our main challenge was what measure could be adopted to stop the trend of increasing global wealth inequality within the next decade. There were two main sources identified for this. One, too much accumulated wealth at the top for the 1%, and not enough available wealth for the bottom 55% of the world population. The key player that was chosen to drive this change is through the channel of governments. And the two solutions that can really be implemented to fix these two key issues are to increase financial transparency. So that is to have all individuals comply with know your client style measures in their annual tax returns to their local governments, and to fight off tax havens. The second solution would be to tackle extreme poverty from every single possible angle. And this would be done by reinforcing the current UN plan to eradicate extreme poverty by 2030. We'd like to thank you all very much for your time and for listening to our considerations.